Good morning, sunshine. Welcome back to Tiger's Occult Books and Research. I'm your friendly internet paranormal researcher and investigator, Dr. Morris, and today's entity comes from Chilean mythology, the Alicanto. Again, referring to our three main reference texts, Illy's Encyclopedia of Spirits, Bain's Encyclopedia of Spirits and Ghosts in World Mythology, and Guyli's Encyclopedia of Ghosts and Spirits, and a smattering of further research. I'm going to tell you where it comes from, how to identify it, what it does, we'll address any ethical concerns, and then we'll make sure we go over safe interaction protocols with the entity if you should ever run across an Alicanto in your travels. So let's get started with the origins. The sources this entity is described in actually gave me significant pause before I decided to include it. As you know, I thoroughly detest modern modifications and altered perceptions of mythological entities, preferring instead to remain consistent with the original myths in order to gain a clearer picture of the world of the paranormal. In 1957, Jorge Luis Borges published Manual de Zoologia Fantastica, or the Handbook of Fantastic Zoology. This book was later translated into English and was published as the Book of Imaginary Beings in 1969. The book was presented as a lost bestiary book written in the tradition of old natural history writings, and while Borges did a significant amount of research, he also fabricated a lot of his sources, details, and even creatures. At least the Periton is a complete invention of his. Translator Andrew Hurley said about the topic, "The nature of Borges' erudition, creativity, and sense of fun is such that it has been simply impossible to ferret out all the originals, where originals in fact ever existed. Some of his quotations are almost certainly apocrypha put-ons. My own translator notes may make the book in English seem stodgier, more academic, less fun than it was clearly always meant to be. I hope that readers of this volume, translated by me, dipping into it here and there as Borges hoped they would, will not lose or be stripped of their sense of playfulness by feeling that they have to go look up page numbers for Pliny, for example. Think of it as just another of Borges' ways of blurring lines between the serious and the playful. So, the Book of Imaginary Beings was always a work of fiction. It was never meant to be taken seriously. Borges wasn't lying about actual scientific data. He was just writing fiction. Unfortunately, in this field, there's often little data about certain mythological entities, so previous researchers sometimes grasp at straws, anything they can get their hands on, to try to form a more complete picture, and sometimes errant data like the Book of Imaginary Beings gets roped into the mess. Through absolutely no fault of Borges, he wrote a funny book, and some people took it seriously. That being said, just because it appeared in a funny book, that doesn't mean I can completely discount everything about it. Borges did actually do a significant amount of research. The first account that we know of regarding the Alicanto was actually published by Julio Vicuna Cifuentes, who is widely considered to be one of Chile's first folklorists. In 1915, Cifuentes had quite the productive year, publishing the Studies of Chilean Folklore, as well as myths and superstitions collected from the Chilean oral tradition, with comparative references to other Latin countries. So the very first entry in Studies of Chilean Folklore is, of course, Alicanto. Now, I can't find an English translation of this 111-year-old obscure text, but it is 2026, and we do have powerful specialized tools like Google Translate at our disposal, which saved an awful lot of time. Otherwise, I'd have to go apologize to my high school Spanish teacher for not paying attention in his class and then failing it, and then having to go back and learn Spanish as an adult when I had the opportunity of a kid. It'd be a whole thing. I was not a good student till much later in life. I never learned well when I had to learn. I learned best when I wanted to learn. Anyway, getting off track here. I ran the 1915 article by Cifuentes through Google Translate, and hilariously enough, what came out of the translation is almost word for word identical to Borges' article, and a lot of the information matches Illies' encyclopedia. I'm almost certain that if the Book of Imaginary Beings was a true academic text, Cifuentes would have been cited. That being said, because Borges' Book of Imaginary Beings is a work of fiction, I have to discount it, and I cannot use it as a genuine reference text. But now, that means I have to use a Google Translate result of a 1915 text I can't read, which, honestly, I'd prefer not to. It's certainly suboptimal, but in checking it against Illies and Borges, and almost getting the same result in all three sources, I'm reasonably confident the Google Translate edition will be good enough for our purposes. Anyway, let's get into the physical identification methods. Because the Alicanto came through Chilean oral history, there's no artistic depictions by the Chilean people for me to really share with you. I'm already bending my rules by using Google Translate, so in for a penny, in for a pound, I guess. This is a modern image drawn by Johnny Mulatto in 2019, to the best of my understanding, as shown on the Florida State University site. I'm fairly certain this was for an art project, not an actual cryptid research project, but once we get into the description, you'll see how accurate and also inaccurate it is. Now, as we already know, the Chileans used an oral folktale system, so they didn't really do much as far as art or documentation was concerned. It took Cifuentes to go through Chile in the early 1900s to collect the stories. But as we can see through Mulatto's artistic work, the Alicanto is a very bright bird. Legend says that the wings glow and its eyes shine. Illy's description asserts that its eyes are luminous like lasers. So we know it's not human, but it's very obviously some kind of bird. I think the Alicanto falls more into the cryptid spectrum rather than the spirits that I'm trying to cover. But in the interests of completeness, it's in Illy's Encyclopedia of Spirits, so we're going to cover it. Anyway, all that to say, for all intents and purposes, we're going to call it a Class 6. As for description identifier, there's some interesting things to note in the folklore tales and legends that'll help us with this. Based on its immediate description and behavior, we're going to call it a Class 6 ornithological prospector. Moving into the folklore tales and legends, this is where we learn some interesting things about the Alicanto. It's regarded as a magic bird and is noted to appear in dreams on occasion. However, once we get into the biology, things get a little bit weird. The Alicanto seems to survive on a steady diet of gold or silver, depending on what it likes. Cifuentes indicates that an Alicanto that eats gold will have, predictably, golden glowing wings. Alicanto that prefers silver will have silver glowing wings. It's pretty straightforward enough. Now, even though it has fairly standard wings, the image we have from Mulatto is somewhat misleading. This is one of the inaccuracies. According to Cifuentes, Illies, and even Borges, there's the interesting fact that sometimes paranormal, magical entities must obey the laws of physics. As we all know, the atomic weight of gold is 169.966. We'll just go with 196.9. The atomic weight of silver is 107.9. But as far as useful information is concerned, what that means is there is 11.17 troy ounces per cubic inch of gold. That's 19.32 grams per cubic centimeters for those who refuse to use freedom units. Likewise, that's 6.07 troy ounces per cubic inch of silver, or 10.49 grams per cubic centimeter. So what we're really getting at is gold and silver are physically heavy metals, and a bird that exists on a diet of silver or gold winds up being too heavy to fly. As a result, when it's well fed, it can't even run very fast. When it's fasting, it is described as being quite agile, but after dinner, this bird's going nowhere fast. As far as the mating cycle is concerned, the female is known to live in small caves and only lays 2 eggs. It's unclear if it's 2 eggs at a time or 2 eggs in its entire life cycle, but the shells are known to be made out of the same material that specific Alicanto feeds on, whether gold or silver. As far as its behavior is concerned, it seems to be a devious bugger. The most common myth says if you can sneak up on an Alicanto and not get caught, it will lead you to gold or silver treasure. If it catches you, it will deliberately lead you off of jagged cliffs. Illy's expands on that some more. She suggests if the Alicanto actually likes you, it will lead you to treasure. But if it doesn't like you, or if it's being used to deliver some sort of punishment to you, that's when it will lead you off a cliff. Speaking of, the ethical considerations, well, there's no evidence to indicate that it's actively malicious or openly hostile or harmful. Illy's indicates that no one is required to follow it. You do so at your own risk. As such, I cannot suggest actively attempting to chase or hunt this entity. It's not openly harmful, and if its diet is silver and gold, biologically, I cannot conclude that the meat would be fit for human consumption. There's no reason, ethically or morally, to want to cause harm to this entity. As for the safe interaction methods, I would advise extreme caution if you ever decide to actually follow an Alicanto. Night vision equipment would be strongly recommended, as the Alicanto is known to be nocturnal. And seriously, watch your step. Anyway, that's about all the information I was able to dig up about the Alicanto. I hope you found it informative. As always, like, comment, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. You can find me on all the regular alt tech sites as well, depending on how tight you've got your tinfoil hat. If you have an entity that you need me to cover, go ahead and let me know in the comment section down below. Till next time, fellas, I'll see you down here at the lab.